Friday. That has always been my favorite day of the week. The smell of the weekend. How those weekends are spent evolves over time, but in the end, it's always that feeling of freedom to be able to do what you want to do. Nowadays, I wake up even more excited on Fridays. Not so much because of the lingering weekend coming up, but Disney Plus releases new content, and recently they have been knocking it out of the park. For the last 3 months or so, the new releases have been excellent. First, we had The Mandalorian Season 2, now we have Wandavision. Both shows are really, really good. Disney Plus Fridays, I think it has become a thing. Hello, and welcome to the review of Champions. Today we're going to talk about episode 5 of Wandavision, currently streaming on Disney+. Before we begin, I would like to invite all who are listening in or watching us to join our community. Go to our forum on Sakar, make an account, chat us up, and if you're willing, you can be on the podcast or the review yourself. We are open to anyone and we would love to see you there. Well, let me introduce today's panel. A small panel this time. With me are Lord Deathman.
Hello, everyone.
And we have Taylor first.
Hello.
Hi, and I am Sakar's Grandmaster. Arch and Biz couldn't make it today, but Arch did pre-record some comments which you will see in the review and we may discuss it. Well, episode 5 of WandaVision returns to the sitcom format, but it's now more mixed with what happens outside of the bubble. Wanda and Vision have some trouble with their children and the dog. Vision seems to become more doubtful about what's going on outside of the hex, and I call it this to support Darcy. We see Captain Rambo, Jimmy Woo, and Darcy Lewis trying to solve this mystery. Now we're going to take a deeper dive into this episode, and we're going to talk spoilers. So if you haven't seen the episode, go do that first, and then come back after to watch our review. With that being said, I would like to give the word to our first panel member, Taylor. We went back to sitcoms. I got some serious Family Ties and Growing Pains vibes from this week's episode. Do you have any more? But that mix up with outside, Wanda went outside. What's up with that? Do you have some thoughts and ideas about that?
Yeah, well, the primary influence on this episode was Family Ties. The house was very reminiscent of Family Ties. The way Vision was dressed was very reminiscent of Stephen Keaton, although a lot of sitcom dads in the 80s dressed like that. The opening credits were very much influenced by Family Ties, but they were also influenced by, as you mentioned, Growing Pains and Full House. Especially the scene, there's a scene in the opening credits of the whole family holding hands running across a grass field towards the camera. That is directly out of the opening credits of Full House, which started in 1987. It's still in the 80s. Some people forget that it wasn't just a 90s show. The other thing I noticed about just in general, and the brilliance of this show, the way that it captures the different eras of sitcoms, the writing, the style of humor is so on point. It's so exactly in sync with where they are in the history of sitcoms. It's really amazing how well they do it. Also, of course, the very special episode, which was the title of this episode, which is a trope where silly sitcoms would occasionally do episodes where serious matters were discussed or were brought in or a part of it. And many, many sitcoms in the 80s did that. Family Ties was one, Growing Pains, The Cosby Show. Pretty much all of them at some point or another had very special episodes, and some of them had them more often than others. Another trope, of course, we saw is a baby's born, and the following season, the baby is suddenly 3-4 years old. The way the twins aged themselves up was kind of a nod to that trope, because having an infant kind of puts a kink in doing the funny stuff in a sitcom if you're constantly having to hold a baby. So they quickly would age them up quite often. Family Ties did it also when they had a new baby arrive. So those are just some of them. But again, my main point is sitcom-wise is just how on the nose they are, and how you can tell from the way they are filming when they are no longer in the show. For example, when they were having that little argument in the kitchen and Wanda wanted it to end and she started rolling the credits, which, by the way, I found out that the credits for WandaVision are the actual credits for WandaVision. They are the names on their credits are the names of the people who make the actual show, which is pretty darn meta itself. But she started rolling the credits and walked out of the room. Vision would have none of that. He followed her, and suddenly the aspect ratio and the filming, the way it was being filmed, was totally different. It wasn't a multicam sitcom anymore. And now we knew that that was real Wanda and real Vision talking to each other in the MCU, outside of the fantasy, whoever is creating it. Which then brings me to your other question about going out. Yes, Wanda, they sent in a drone first to try to talk to her, and then some people there wanted, had a backup plan to take direct action against her. That didn't work. She destroyed the drone and she took it outside and she threatened everyone out there. Monica tried to talk her down at that point, and she would have none of it. She told them she had what she wants and no one's going to take it away from her. So there's a lot of ominous stuff going on there, which makes the people outside believe Wanda is 100% responsible for all this. It makes some of them believe that, and rightly so, given the information that they have. But we see a lot of indications going on inside that she's not in total control of this. And if she was in total control, this is just me now, she wouldn't do it this way. Why would she do a sitcom that's being broadcast and that's jumping from decade to decade? Why wouldn't she just pick her favorite world and just stay there? Something is causing this stuff to happen, and it doesn't make sense that she would want it to happen this way. What's going to happen when we run out of decades of sitcoms? What happens to her perfect life at that point? So I really don't think she is in full control of this. I think someone is either manipulating her, and we see at points where she appears confused, where she didn't expect something to happen that did, including the big wow at the end. But there were others as well, as for example, when Agnes, broke character and asked the director, Wanda, do you want me to do that again? Which was a very interesting scene. And Wanda appeared to be taken back by it. She didn't expect that to happen. So is it only certain people that she's not controlling? She can't control the kids. We know that. And she apparently can't control Agnes, or can she? I don't know. Agnes sees stuff happen and doesn't react to it. But everyone else they hide stuff from. So I think what's happening is the walls are coming down slowly. Whatever power is controlling this is slowly weakening, and things are just getting more and more difficult to maintain. And I think there's going to be more pressure from the outside that's going to add to the stress of it all. And that's all I'll say for the opening, and I'd like to hear what everybody else says.
Yeah, well, Lord Deathman raised his head, so let's hear it.
I just had a question for Taylor around the sitcoms, and thank you for that answer. I watched sitcoms as a kid off and on, so I'm not nearly as well versed as Taylor would be on some of these shows and the time periods they aired and what the actual scenarios of the sitcoms were. I do remember marketing when I was a kid, like on this very special episode, and that was usually a cue for me as a younger kid to not watch that episode because I knew it wasn't going to be funny and it was going to cover something that was, horrible. Someone died or someone was on drugs or something that just like wasn't in my purview as a kid at the time. But in any event, what I also noticed, and I'm not sure if this is a trope of sitcoms, so I'm going to ask Taylor to keep me honest on this one, but there's awareness in some characters that they are on a sitcom. And the only shows that I could really think of that follow that format consistently would be something like Moonlighting, where David Addison and, or I should say Bruce Willis and Sybil Shepherd seemed to know that they were on a television show. And Saved by the Bell, Zack Snyder seems to, not Zack Snyder, Zach, what was the, Morris, was it? the lead of the
Zach
Saved by the Bell
Morris,
show.
yes.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. Thank you, Taylor. He seemed to be aware that he was on a TV show. So I was just wondering if Taylor knew of any other examples of that in the sitcom world that they might be drawing from on the show.
Yeah, well, as you know, that's a trope called breaking the fourth wall, which is common in a lot of fiction. And you mentioned, of course, two of the biggest ones. Now, of course, Moonlighting wasn't a sitcom. It was a private eye action mystery type show with a lot of humor mixed in. And you're right, they did break the fourth wall. That's the show that made Bruce Willis a star, by the way. And of course, Zach Morris constantly broke the fourth wall. Now you see it, at least back then, you saw it more often in shows geared towards younger people, like Saved by the Bell, which was a Saturday morning children's show for the most part. But I'm trying to think of any others that did it. I mean, there's quite a few where they would look into the camera every once in a while, and that actually became more of a trope later on, especially like with Modern Family, and then everyone copied Modern Family. Modern Family, of course, broke the fourth wall with the sitting on the couch. But they also all the time would glance into the camera and give that look, But
Yeah.
as far as any other in the 80s, off the top of my head, I'm not thinking of any others than the ones that you mentioned. Of course, Saved by the Bell I think, started around 1990 or 91. But yeah, good examples, though.
Well, yeah, it seems that the show is just so lovingly crafted in terms of its attention to detail. It's functioning on so many different levels, and for me, the show really does feel like it's transcended the genre. And I know people throw around terms like that, trying to sound fancy, but it really has in this case. It just turns out to be true. We have a sitcom that we're watching about Wanda and Vision. Then we have MCU action that we're all sort of familiar with in that setting. And then there seems to be an overall meta awareness of the outside world, like when you're seeing the credits run in that episode and they're the real people who produce the show. So juggling that many layers and having them intertwine with each other, or I should say, in this case it is intertwine and not entwine. They used the word on the show and I was almost, I was like, as a vocabulary nut. I was like, when you entwine something, that's two things, and when you intertwine them, that's more than one thing. But as an aside, they've managed to blend all of these things together in a way that's really seamless. So I just continue to want to give the show high marks, and I think once again, this episode manages to top all of the previous episodes that came before. So really incredibly high bench that's been set by Disney and WandaVision, and I really hope competitors can keep up on their streaming services.
Yeah, well, that remains to be seen, of course. Thank you both for this excellent discussion. We're gonna go to the next part I wanted to discuss. The show is called WandaVision. But outside, it seems Monica Rambeau is the main protagonist. What do you think about her, and what's up with her and Captain Marvel? Well, does anyone of you have something to comment on that?
I will take a stab at some of his comments around Monica being the protagonist once you're outside of the Westview simulation, or the Hex as we're calling it now per the episode.
Let's call it the Hex.
Yeah,
That's
right. Let's call it the Hex. But she's an interesting character.
It's kind of catching on.
It is. Darcy wanted to make it a thing, and now here it is, a thing in the real world, even though she doesn't seem to be able to make it a thing at Sword. She has her little group of folks who are using the title. But back to Monica. There was a lot of interesting things going on with her, including that look that she gives when she hears the name Captain Marvel. One, I was surprised to hear the name Captain Marvel because I don't ever think it gets used in Captain Marvel or Endgame. I might be mistaken about that, but I think that's actually the first time you actually hear Captain Marvel get referred to as Captain Marvel. which kind of creates this, when you're a comic book nut, you're like, oh, well, why did she take that name? Captain in the Air Force, and then perhaps she's using as a moniker, she's paying homage to Marvel, her predecessor in the Kree sort of armed forces there. But in any event, Monica's look is very telling. She looks uncomfortable. Some people are saying that it's resentment. Other people are saying that it was a little bit of anger or bitterness. I really didn't know how to read the look other than that it was not positive. So I think there might be some abandonment issues going on as far as Monica's concerned, and that when we get Captain Marvel back together with Monica, it might not be as pleasant a reunion as we could have imagined it. There might be some issues that those two have to resolve before they get back to a good space. Monica looks like she might be on the cusp of developing her powers as per these weird readings after coming out of the anomaly. It seems like something about her fundamental structure has been changed. So that seems interesting. But as a protagonist, I don't know that I would go as far as Stanton to say that, she's kind of the lead of the show when you're outside of the simulation. I still think that even though Wanda isn't there, it's still very much about her when you're at Sword Base or when you're having people talk to each other. They're always trying to unpack her history, what the motivations would be, all of those kinds of things. But I compare her to another character, another African-American lead character on a science fiction film that I don't feel was handled very well in recent times, the Michael Burnham character at Star Trek Discovery. And I sort of reflexively compare her to another captain, right? They're both captains at this point on their show. And there's just something much more likable, even though Monica seems to carry the same authority, the same presence and expertise, whereas Michael Burnham, they didn't seem to hit the nail on the head with that. So I think the writers are just doing an excellent job of portraying the character and insinuating her into the overall MCU. She seems to be finding her way around the MCU at the same time as it almost feels like she's always been a part of the MCU, if that makes any sense. So I just wanted to feel that aspect of Stanton's remarks. I don't know if Taylor has anything to say about any of his notes.
I saw he had his hand up, so Taylor, go take it.
Yeah, I just wanted to react to your comment. I'm 90% sure, and of course the World Wide Web will correct me if I'm wrong. I'm 90% sure that Nick Fury called her Captain Marvel in Captain Marvel. He was mispronouncing Marvel at the time, and she corrected him, if I'm not mistaken. But things like that, yeah, he probably made it a habit after that of calling her Captain Marvel, and once it went through S.H.I.E.L.D., it probably spread around, especially when people were asking, who the heck is this person who just came down and helped us fight off Thanos? But I do believe she was mentioned. And
she was also called Captain Marvel in Spider-Man Far From Home.
Ah, you're right. You are right. She was. I forgot all about that. What I'm upset about is we still haven't heard Scarlet Witch. I was really hoping Darcy was going to give her an internet name, Scarlet Witch, to go along with Hex or something, but they pointed out that Wanda doesn't have a nickname. I hope she gets it pretty soon. Maybe the Halloween costume will make them start calling her Scarlet Witch. But about Monica Rambeau, I mean, yeah, I agree with Lord Deathman that the acting and the writing and the portrayal of her is very, very good. I'm not even going to begin to guess at what her thoughts about Captain Marvel are at this point. We will find out eventually. That's one thing you know about the MCU. We'll find out eventually. So I'm not going to try to read her mind. But trust me, whatever her look was will end up being 100% appropriate later on down the line. Which just brings me to the next point, that I think Marvel has somehow cornered the market on good writers in the entertainment industry, because compared to the vast majority of other shows and movies, the writing on this show and on other Marvel products is just unbelievable. It is so subtle and so layered, and I promised myself I wasn't going to beat up on Discovery, but that's why Michael Burnham didn't work, because the writing is subpar. At least some of it is. Okay.
I knew if I had to take a stab at Burnham that Taylor was going to sink his teeth into that one too.
But again, didn't want to get bogged down in the Discovery discussion.
Yeah,
but again,
and
just to get to what Wellivers mentioned on the board yesterday, that Wandavision has two meanings. It's Wandavision like television, but it's also Wanda's vision. You pointed that out, and you can point out things like that with almost everything in this show. Everything can have multiple meanings, and probably does have multiple meanings, and everything is so subtle. I noticed on this episode, and I went back and checked on the internet and to see if I was right, every time they're holding a newspaper, the headline has something to do with motherhood on the front page, and the back page is an ad for a TV. Every single time in every scene where they're holding a newspaper. And it's just incredibly subtle things like that. And we haven't even talked about the commercial for this episode yet, Lago. We see how these commercials are going through Wanda's whole life. It's just amazing, but I don't want to monopolize.
Yeah. Lord Deathman, you had a follow-up, or? No.
I did, actually. And I just wanted to quickly say, as far as the commercials go, do we have any kind of ratification of the theory that the two actors who are always in those commercials are Wanda's parents, that they're Oleg and Maria, I think her mother's name is? Any confirmation of that yet, or is it still theory?
It's still theory as far as I know.
Aha.
And yeah, we know from the comics that Oleg is not really Wanda's father now, is he?
No, even when we didn't think her real father, Magneto, was her father, his name wasn't Oleg either, the guy we thought could have been her father.
Yeah. So we'll see how that goes. Then we get into mutants and X-Men. Well, speaking of that, Lord Deathman. We have the actor Evan Peters show up. Evan Peters portrays Quicksilver in the X-Men movies. And in this case, he portrays Pietro. In the X-Men movies, he's called Peter. In the MCU, Quicksilver has been referred to as Pietro. So, is this the multiverse? Or is this, like Darcy said, a simple recast by Wanda or someone else? Or is it something else entirely? Do you have some thoughts about that?
I do. And I happen to be of two minds when it comes to this particular stunning reveal in this episode, by the way. I think it could go either way. But first, I want to take a step back before I sort of get into my own ideas around Pietro's appearance in this episode. It's really weird that we're taking this step with the MCU and we're embarking on the multiverse. And once again, the MCU gets to kind of poke its eye at the DCEU, you know, get that finger poke in the eye, because here we have a speedster character who has just crossed universes, right? Usually the purview of the Scarlet Speedster over at the DCEU, he would be the guy to start traversing multiverses and going to different places. But the MCU beats them to it, at least in the streaming world. We know that the Flash of the television show has been traversing different dimensions for quite some time now, but it does seem somewhat fresh here to have that particular character be the one to lead us into this multiversal landscape. But the reason I say that I'm of two minds of it is because this really could be the biggest misdirect in the history of misdirects, right? By getting Evan Peters to come on, portraying the role that was originated by another actor here in our universe. It could be to sort of get us theory crafting and spinning out on something that's a total red herring, so that the MCU gets to have a little bit more cover on this show to keep what's really happening secret just a little bit longer, right? So it could be an elaborate distraction, is what I'm trying to say there. But on the other hand, where my second mind comes into play is that we do know that Spider-Man 3 and Doctor Strange 2 are going to feature the multiverse fairly heavily, that we're going to be potentially drawing from older iterations of characters that come from previous IP leaseholders, going to be crossing over into the MCU. So there's kind of no reason to discount the idea that Evan Peters actually is Pietro of the Fox universe, somehow brought into our universe. And there is some evidence to support the idea, because Wanda does seem to have fundamental limits in terms of her ability to resurrect the dead. And a part of my whole theory for what's going on, to take a digression just for a second to go down an alternate path here, is Wanda, in her grief, I think, constructed the hex as an escape from her grief, and sort of recreating life in a more idyllic way that she's always fantasized about. And I think it was probably just this cathartic yell, if you will, kind of like her No More Mutants, but now creating a world that's perfect, because this is a woman who suffered a lot of trauma growing up, starting from what happened to her and her brother in Sokovia, all the way to Lagos. That there just doesn't seem to be, she never seems to get a break. And I think Westview is her break, and that this is her line in the sand in terms of what she's, set out for herself. But anyway, even though she demonstrates this incredible power to sort of fundamentally rearrange matter, she can't create something from nothing, because that's what a true God could do, and that would be like a miracle if you could make something from absolutely nothing. But she can take raw material and rearrange it to her liking. So she also can't resurrect the dead, right? So that's a fundamental limit that would stop her from bringing the Pietro we know from this universe back to life. She had to recast him, or someone had to bring in an alternate player, and maybe a character like Mephisto snatched that character from another dimension, mind wiped him the same way everyone else in Westview has been mind wiped, and brought him to sort of enter stage left into this sitcom. So I'm of two minds. I don't think that you can rule out either possibility. And I think that folks who are trying to rule out the idea that he is from another alternate universe, that he is coming from the Fox universe, I think that comes more from the MCU purist that doesn't want to see the MCU sort of get touched by Fox characters that are not so well liked. Although I have to say, my favorite character in the Fox universe is probably that version of Quicksilver, because that was one of the rare times the Fox producers and writers felt they could give themselves leeway to have a fun character that told a couple of jokes while it wasn't all gloom and doom and grim superheroic beatdowns. I kind of enjoyed that character in some of the movies, that he was in, especially some of the sequences they designed for him. So you can't rule it out either way. And I am really on the fence. They've done an excellent job of making it so that you just can't say one way or the other. And I think that is a part of the beauty of the show. I'm sure they're going to give us more insight into it next episode. But until then, the mystery remains. And I think that's what's great about the show.
Yeah. Well, our producer also had something to say.
The Quicksilver reveal. Wow, that was big, of course, obviously. Now, first and foremost, I do not believe that is a reference to the Foxverse at all, at least right now. I just want to clarify, not believing something doesn't mean I think it's not that. It just means I am not at all convinced that this is Foxverse at all for right now, and I don't really see any evidence of that. I mean, it's not impossible, for sure. You could definitely get some sort of level of Foxverse out of that. I just don't think that's where they're going here, and I would caution people who might be jumping to that conclusion. I think where the show kind of seems to be headed isn't that some doorway got opened to some alternate reality where Fox had created movies and Quicksilver jumped through. I'm not saying he jumps through as a movie character, obviously. I'm just saying I don't think that the show is leading towards some reality warp got transferred in there. I think everything is contained within the physical world that they're doing here. So we've seen other characters get possessed, for lack of a better word, mind controlled, and they've taken on new roles. And so this looks like one of maybe a couple of things for me, more likely than a Quicksilver from the Foxverse jumped in. The first would be just some other random citizen of the thousands we haven't seen yet has been brought into this role by, it doesn't seem like it's by Wanda. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and assume it's not by Wanda because she literally says it's not by her, and I believe her in this instance. I think the show is telling you it's definitely not her, which makes me wonder who it could be. Agnes? It's possible. I know Norm had that one comment that she should to stop her, or it's even possible, a little more crazy, that this is literally the character who's behind it all.
Well, you said something interesting. Wanda can't resurrect the dead, but Vision was dead and is now alive. So what you're actually saying is Wanda didn't resurrect Vision. That's what Tyler Hayward tried to convince everyone of. But you have different thoughts on that?
I do. I think Vision might be a notable exception. Vision is sentient. Vision has consciousness. But is Vision alive, right? I don't want to get into a philosophical or metaphysical debate, but he is an artificial construct, and he may sort of skirt the rules of being able to bring back an organic being that actually had a soul. We know that Vision has a mind, but I don't know that he actually has a soul, or, what would constitute a soul in the religious definition of the term. But I think just Vision's nature probably made it so that Wanda could bring him back, and not even in the full scope of what he used to be. There seems to be the idea that he is somewhat diminished, because I don't think he actually has the Mind Stone, even though he's been able to use some of the properties of the Mind Stone during the show. I think what we're having, or what we're seeing in this show, is sort of Vision that's been reconstructed, and Wanda is filling in the gaps where she was not able to make a fully faithful recreation of Vision as he was when he was alive with the Mind Stone.
Yeah, Vision even says, I don't know who I am, who I was before all this. Is it really Vision? Or he literally lost his mind, of course. But we're basically at Star Trek now, huh? The Measure of a Man. Lieutenant Commander Bruce Maddox and Captain Jean-Luc Picard having a discussion about is Commander Data alive? Taylor, you had any thoughts on this subject?
The key thing to think about on this, and as far as is it a multiverse thing, we'll find out. All right, I'm not gonna waste mental energy on that, because it, like Deathman said, I'm of about 12 minds on it. They could do a whole lot of different explanations of why this actor is playing this role at this time. So I'll let them surprise us and dazzle us with that. But the key to me on the intro, one, that is a trope. The unknown relative who hasn't been seen before, usually a funny uncle, shows up for an episode or for a couple of episodes, and usually has a pretty big impact on a show, on a sitcom. But remember when that happened? Wanda and Vision were arguing. They were not in sitcom mode when that knock came at the door. And Wanda apparently was not controlling that knock at the door and didn't recognize the guy at first. And she even asked him, in a questioning way, Pietro? Because if it was really Pietro, she'd have known him immediately, even without the recast. So I think, and again, I'm not going to theorize, but I think there was an outside entity that tried to put them back into sitcom mode, get them out of arguing with each other. The question is, can Vision get rolled back into sitcom mode now, or has he gotten far enough out of it now that they can no longer rewind it and put him back into being blissfully ignorant of what's going on? I think that's the question for next episode.
Lord Deathman, you had a follow-up.
I did. I don't know that Vision can be rolled up as easily or for as long, to answer Taylor's question. I think that Wanda is losing her grip on it, as somehow the Vision as we knew him previously is reasserting himself. So it's kind of strange and a little disconcerting to see the Vision actually emote in a way that we'd never seen him emote in previous movies. He's usually a very cool customer. I mean, he gives the semblance of someone who can be sincere and caring and reasoning and logical, but we've never seen him angry. We've never seen him, shout or be confused or frustrated. So I think that something of the Vision, the actual Vision, is sort of coming back to life, and Wanda's losing her ability to easily control and manipulate him as we go along. Which brings me to another idea, and you guys know that I'm not really big on theory crafting, but it strikes me that what is happening in Westview is that while Wanda is using it as a means to exercise her grief, it's also an incubator. I think that whoever is really behind all of this is using Wanda's idyllic fantasy to get at the children. And the children do play this part starting from the early episodes in the series. There's always this fundamental question around, why are there no other children in Westview? Why were Vision and Wanda childless? And now they have children who seem to be accelerating in growth per the laws of a sitcom. And Westview could be the incubator by which they are brought to full maturity for use by some sinister entity. So, taking us for a moment to the source material, the birth of Billy and Thomas in the comic books is really a strange and out there story. It happened in the West Coast Avengers. I shouldn't say it happened in the West Coast Avengers. We learned the true nature of the twins in the West Coast Avengers after the babies had sort of been on the comic book scene for a little while. So Wanda and Vision were status quo. They were a husband and wife with children, and none of us comic book readers thought anything of it. But by the time the West Coast Avengers came along, we were challenged. John Byrne, who is the architect of this story, really threw the whole thing upside down by introducing us to another character by the name of Martin Preston, who was an actor who was in a car crash, and he lost an appendage. He lost his arm during that car crash. Through comic book magic, he manages to make a deal with Mephisto to replace the appendage and to increase his fame as an actor. And Mephisto delivers on that promise, but in a horrifying and sort of gruesome way. Instead of replacing this person's missing arm, he tears off all of this person's limbs, as in the legs and the both arms, and replaces them with artificial shards of a soul, right? Like with artificial limbs that come from other demons. And we find out that some of this person's appendages actually were that the children were parts of this person's soul. So they weren't actually living beings. Mephisto just took a part of Martin Preston's soul and turned it into two twins, which became Wanda and Vision's children. Like I said, I know it's bonkers and it follows nothing but comic book logic, but check out the West Coast Avengers. Google Master Pandemonium is the bad guy's name after he becomes Mephisto's thrall. And you'll kind of see that Mephisto did this so that he could have two powerful lieutenants sort of in his army. And I think that if it's Agnes or Mephisto acting in the background of WandaVision, the same kind of thing might be unfolding here. But that's really as far as I want to go with any kind of theory crafting.
Well, interestingly enough, our producer also had a comment on this.
We keep talking about the kids, and rightfully so. The line, of course, that stood out to me this time was that Vision himself directly pointed out that there are no other children in Westview, that he doesn't see them on the playground when he goes to work, ever. And it just brings back the idea that we keep talking about, that it's all for the children, as the mantra goes from episode 2. And even in episode 1, where they were asking him already why they didn't have kids. So there's there's too much smoke. There's got to be some fire there. I don't know. I have no idea what they could be using him for, but or why they would need him to age. I don't even want to guess. I've done a lot of speculation in this show, but I really have no idea what that could be about. It even occurred to me that since that might be what the core of the show is, that somebody on the outside manipulated Wanda to get here in the first place, whispered in their ear, got them to steal Vision. I don't know that that's the case, but if this is really that important to whoever's doing this, then it's entirely possible. I don't know.
And that would be in line with the comic books to a certain extent, but just playing out in a different way. So I do think we're trying to age up these children to maturity and then recruit them into some evil army for some sinister purpose.
Okay. Taylor, do you have thoughts on this or any other subject you want to discuss on this review?
Well, one, I'd just like to make a comment on comic book logic. Why do we accept comic book logic in comic books, and yet we freak out when comic book logic is in comic book movies? I wish the fandom would realize these are comic book movies, so they should have the same logic as the comic books that they're based on, and yet everyone expects them to be like documentary levels of accuracy as opposed to just accepting the fantasy part of it. That's just a side note. For the children, remember when way back in episode 2, I think it was, she's at the meeting with Dottie, and Dottie said, "This is for the children," and the whole town in unison replied, "For the children," like they were in a trance. The only other time that we've seen that is in the most recent episode, and it happened when they picked up the email, which is another indication as to, as they progress forward through time in these sitcoms, they're now able to access the outside world internet. So why would Wanda do that if she was in control of everything? And when they did pick up that email, they all read it in unison, like they were in a trance. I don't know what it means yet. I just noticed it and figure it's going to build into something else. And I don't know if it's because of communication from the outside or not. Remember when the outside communication came over the radio, Dottie came out of her trance for a moment. Remember? That's when she broke the glass and cut her hand. Mm-hmm. It was when the voice came over the radio, communication from the outside world. Now, I don't know if it's the same with the, I don't remember the character's name, the co-worker of Vision, because Vision kind of brought him out of the trance with his own powers, but it was at the same time as they were getting that email. They picked up that email from Sword, and then he came out of his trance for a while. And then I guess Vision put him back into it just for his own sake, because the guy was freaking out, and he said, "You got to stop her." He never said you got to stop Wanda. He said you got to stop her, so you can't be sure about that. Which makes me think more about Agnes. Does anyone believe that stuff she was spraying over the babies was really just perfume or whatever? That had to have more meaning.
Right.
That had to have more meaning than that. And then the kids aged up a few minutes later. And then Agnes was in the kitchen the next time when they aged up again. And she appears to be oblivious to them aging in front of her eyes. So Agnes is still out there, and I don't know what her role is.
I wouldn't call it oblivious. I would call it more like not surprised. I mean,
Gentlemen,
I think she noticed it, but she's not surprised by it because she knows what she's doing.
Yeah. Agnes knows what's going on. She's in on the joke. And I do have one sort of piece of anxiety regarding WandaVision, in that I think we're 2 seconds away from a controversy unfolding with WandaVision if the story is actually going to play out the way that I think it is, in that Mephisto or some other big bad, insert name here, is sort of responsible for using Westview as an incubator, meaning surreptitiously impregnating Wanda against her will to have 2 children, which that person could then use for their own ends, right? This feels like Handsome Guy, where I think we're like 2 seconds away from people from the rest of the fandom catching on to that, or the anti-fandom catching on to that and turning it into, tomorrow's non-traversy.
Well, we have to wait and see if that happens. I think the children are Wanda's and Vision's, so I don't think Wanda was impregnated by another entity. I don't believe that for a second. Well, is there anything else we wanted to unpack, or are we done here?
I just wanted to mention one other small thing, and I think it's the second time we've seen this, but the mailman. He seems to be a little bit aware of what's going on. He said something to the effect of, your mom won't let that happen, or she's in control of everything. Something to the words of that effect, which seemed kind of strange, because most of the characters they interact with don't mention anything that's related to the situation that they're actually in.
Well, that makes 3. You have Agnes, you have the mailman, and you have Dottie.
Yeah, that's true.
But actually, Herb also. Herb was also
That's
aware.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
So there are actually more characters who are aware, and.
But the mailman is the only one who seems to be nonchalant about it. The others all appear scared or worried when at the points when they're aware, or at least nervous.
Right. Yeah. They are anxious, and they are covering it up with sort of like weird happiness, right? Like they're just in a trance. But that has echoes to an episode of The Twilight Zone. It's a Good Life, in which this small boy Andy sort of fundamentally controls reality in a small town, just like Westview, and everyone is aware that Andy has control over reality, and they sort of act happy around him, but on the inside they're all kind of terrified of what he can do.
Yes, and that is exactly another thing I was going to mention. I hear a lot of people, I read a lot of things on the internet, people referring to Wandavision as a sitcom with some MCU superhero stuff going on around it. That's not what this show is. This is a elongated episode of The Twilight Zone, in which the plot is characters are trapped inside of a sitcom. Yeah,
I agree. I have been saying that since the first 2 episodes were aired. It is like Twilight Zone, only it's not clear yet for a lot of people. That will conclude our review for episode 5. Before we finish, I would like to ask you to hit that subscribe button and notification bell on YouTube, or follow us on Twitter or Instagram, like our Facebook page, join the forum on Sakar. That way you will never miss us and we won't have to miss you. Thank you, and see you next week for our episode 6 review.